Hey there, it's Tankerl, and this here is the LG G Pro 2. It was announced at Mobile World Congress, and it hasn't really made it to the US yet. What this is a tablet-like phone with a larger screen that replaces last year's LG G Pro, and it takes a lot of its design cues from the G2 and the G3, which is currently the flagship for LG. And I finally got my hands on one. It took me a little while longer than usual. I've been using it for about a month, and it's a pretty pleasant phone to use. So what's this all about? Basically, as you can see, it looks very much like the G2 and G3 do, with the buttons on the back below the camera. But it's larger than the other two, of course, since it is very much a competitor of something like the Note 3. What is there to say? It's a 5.9-inch 1080p display. It's an IPS panel. It's a very beautiful panel, as you can see here. The colors are nice, it's bright, it's got great viewing angles. Really nothing to complain about here. Very good display. Very little bezel, typical of the G2 and G3 kind of design, since the buttons are in the back. So it's mostly screen. So even though it's a large phone, 5.9 inches, it doesn't feel too huge. I mean, you know, it's all relative because we're talking large phones here to start with. As you can see here, basically is the layout. You have a bunch of sensors and notification LED here in the front, along with the earpiece and 2 megapixel front-facing camera here. There is no physical buttons. It's all virtual buttons, as you can see. There's 4 of them: back, home, recent apps, and menu, which is kind of a nice touch. You can configure this any way you want. Around the bezel here, you can see the LG logo. This is all really sparkly black or dark blue. You can't really tell too much in daylight, but it's really obvious outdoors. Flipping it over, the back here is also kind of a sparkling gray, metallic, textured finish. It feels kind of grippy because it's got these tiny little bumps on the plastic. This is a Korean device, so it's got the LTE Advanced logo in the back. Here's the LG logo, and if I pick it up, you can see that there's main speakers located down here. So it's very much a similar layout to the G3. Power button in the middle, volume up, volume down, 13 megapixel autofocus camera with optical image stabilization. This is very much the same camera we've seen on the LG G2. What else is there to talk about? Well, if we do a tour of the outside, got a headphone jack here, which is at the top, secondary microphone, the IR window for the TV remote blaster. This is unique to the Korean model here. It's the digital television broadcast antenna, and then nothing on the left side. The bottom here has what you'd pretty much expect: primary microphone, micro USB charge and data port, and then here you have nothing again on the right hand side. So this is a pretty much familiar layout and general design. There is 3 gigs of RAM on this guy, but it's a Snapdragon 800, not an 801 like the G3. There is also a removable battery cover on this device with a 3200 milliamp hour battery, micro SD card slot all under here. So, you know, this is a pretty fully featured device. So it's got the LG skin. It's not quite as lightweight as the LG G3 skin, but it's probably closer to the G2. The camera is really great. It adds 4K video recording, which didn't exist on the G2, but exists on the G3. It adds the refocus functionality. They call it Smart Focus. It's very similar to the refocus from Nokia and also identical to what's on the G3. The camera app is better in my opinion. Here is actually the G3. And so, as you know, and from my G3 video, I did not like the camera app because the new G3 camera app, while simple, does not include any way to do manual adjustments for ISO, for white balance, or exposure compensation. This is a very similar interface to the G2, and as such, you can see here you have brightness, you have ISO, you have white balance. So yeah, I mean, if I could get this APK and put it on the G3, I'd be much happier. But it does lack the G3's laser autofocus, so obviously not quite as good. So that's basically this phone in a nutshell. I've really enjoyed using it. It's a large phone, but personally I prefer it over the Note 3, despite the fact that it has no stylus, and it's really not necessarily optimized for a large screen. There is a note-taking app, obviously, that works, but You know, I'm not a huge fan of styluses, whatever, pens, so it doesn't really matter too much to me. Overall, you're getting, you know, a state-of-the-art phone. It's nice and snappy, very decent camera, a very decent screen. This particular unit is Korean, and it has LTE that works on AT&T, not on T-Mobile though. So let's do some comparisons with other well-known devices. Oh, and before I go and do that, I wanted to mention the 3200 milliamp hour battery lasts a really long time on this phone. Despite the large screen, you can easily get a day out of it, possibly a day and a half for me, and kind of moderate to heavy use. If you go really hardcore on it, obviously it's not going to last as long. So here's the G Pro. This one is my review unit from last year, and as you can see, it's a bigger phone significantly, and there's even less bezel. And then flipping them over, you can see the difference. Both have 13 megapixel cameras, but this one does not have OIS, and so that's the big difference here. And of course the back buttons, which is LG's trademark, which I really like. It really doesn't bother me at all too much. So let's do comparison in terms of thickness here. They're going to be about the same, although I predict that the G Pro 2 is going to be a bit thinner. That seems to be the trend. Yeah, it's definitely true. Here is the G3, speaking of which. And so, you know, you can compare the displays. Obviously, the G3 has a Quad HD display, so it's kind of hard to compare apples for apples. But you can see both of them are pretty gorgeous screens. And in terms of industrial design, you're looking at very, very similar. Just, you know, difference in size, 5.5 versus 5.9. And then the back, again, very similar design with the buttons below the camera. But of course the G3 has the laser autofocus and the dual LED flash, and both of these are pretty thin. I presume they're about the same, to be frank. So you can see here, thickness, no problems, pretty good. So it's not a thick phone by any means. There's only one phone I want to compare it to, and it's kind of obvious. It's the Note 3 from Samsung with its super bright, super AMOLED display. 1080p displays, both of them. This is 5.9, this is 5.7. So the Note 3 is a little more compact, but also has a little more bezel. Colors pop a little more since it is a super AMOLED display. Nothing too unusual there. But, you know, personally, I think the build quality and the materials are significantly better on the LG. So, you know, that's the one thing about Samsung. That and TouchWiz. TouchWiz is really a pain. But then Samsung has a pen, or whatever you want to call it. And some people really swear by that. I'm personally not a huge fan, but I can understand why somebody would want to pick the Note over the G Pro 2, since it does have the stylus. This is what it looks like when you line them up in the back. This is where the size difference is less obvious. Again, the screen bezel kind of tricks you a bit there. Both have 13 megapixel cameras, but there's OIS on the G Pro 2, and that makes a big difference. Let's look at thickness really quickly. And that's what it looks like. So there you have it, in a nutshell, the G Pro 2. A great phone for those of you who like large phones and can live without a stylus. Anyway, if you like this review, please subscribe to my channel. I'm Tankgirl, TNKGRL, both on Twitter, and tnkgrl.com. Tankgirl is my blog as well. So I hope to see you there soon with more phone reviews. Cheers.